Hello YouTube, welcome back to Classic and New Style Engine Builds. As you all have seen my shorts, I've got my 5.7 Hemi Tour short block. Now, I'm waiting on parts for the timing chain set to come in so I can install it. I know the oil pump's on there, it's just hot bolted on. I'm just keeping it there so I know where it's at. Anyway, so I'm waiting on the parts to get the camshaft in. Speaking of camshaft, what are these engines most known for? Camshaft failure. Yes, that is an issue that is most talked about on these engines because it's the most expensive one. Do lifters fail on this engine? Yes, they do. Why do they fail on this engine? Well, that's what I'm about to talk about. So, the first few theories of why lifters fail on this engine. So I'm going to talk about a YouTuber that's more famous, UTG, Uncle Tony's Garage. He's got a block that he's been rebuilding, and he tried to explain, and he had a pretty good theory at first of why the lifters fail on this engine. I'm not doubting that. It was a pretty good theory on why the camshafts and lifters fail on these engines. And that has to do with crankshaft splash lubrication. So what is crankshaft splash lubrication? Obviously, you got your rods, your crank, and they need oil to, properly work. So the oil that flings off the crank splash lubricates the cam. So in older engines, like this came out of like a 318, 360. It's a flat type of camshaft. The reason why these camshafts needed splash lubrication and as much lubrication as they can, not only do they get oil from the lifters, but they get lubrication from the crank. The reason why they need that is because of the design of the lifter, flat tappet lifter. So as you can see, face of it's flat. This is the part that rides on the cam, like so. So it doesn't take a genius to figure out that can cause a lot of friction, cause a lot of heat, so it needs quite a bit of oil. Now, how does it splash lubricate? I can show you on this 5.3 over here, because this is how it actually works. So you've got, turn on my light for y'all. So you've got the crankshaft that rides here, and the camshaft that rides here. There would normally be a bearing right there. I'm in the process of rebuilding this one as well. So you got your crank and rods. You can imagine them. They're spinning. The engine's running and operating. So the oil from the crank is flinging. It's going everywhere inside the block, going back down to the oil pan and getting flung up. So as the connecting rods and crank pass through here, they fling oil up on the camshaft, which keeps it lubricated. So that's how the older engines kept these old style camshafts lubricated. And that's what kept them from failing, as well as a zinc additive. So the zinc additive was mainly there just to provide a little bit more extra lubrication to keep the camshaft alive. Alright, so UTG says the reason why these camshafts fail with the lifters is because they have poor splash lubrication. If this was an older engine, yes, that would be the case. But why is he saying they have poor splash lubrication? So, back to the 5.3. As you notice, the crank cam correlation, they're really close. Nice and close. So, the crankshaft gets plenty of oil on the cam. Now, if you go over to the 5.7 Hemi, here's your crank, and the camshaft is all the way down here. So that is his first reasoning, is the crankshaft is too far away from the camshaft to give adequate splash lubrication. The second part is there is an oil gallery that runs the length of the block. Here is said oil gallery. From the front, all the way to the back here. So that's the other thing he says, where splash lubrication is not able to lube the cam. In an older engine, this would be true. The camshaft would not get adequate splash lubrication and more than likely fail. So, nailed it, right? Not exactly. The difference between this block and the block that camshaft came out of is year. This is a 2004 block. That camshaft came out of like a 70s, maybe 80s, or 60s era block. Something like from that era right there. That's a 1975 440 that uses the splash lubrication to lube the cam. So, but why is it not true for these engines? Well, the oiling system in these engines, they provide more oil to the lifters, and the oil squeezes out onto the lifters, as well as the lifter design. So as I mentioned, flat tappet camshaft, they create quite a bit of friction. Now with advances in technology, they started making roller camshafts back in like the early 90s, and they started getting really popular as the 90s went on. Almost every 99 vehicle had a roller cam. What is a roller cam? Well, here's your lifter for a roller cam. As you notice, there's a roller lifter. As the name implies, that rolls, and that rolls on the cam, which does two things. One, it reduces friction and eliminates the need for zinc. It also eliminates the need for splash lubrication, because the camshaft doesn't need as much oil as one of these would to stay healthy. So, the way these blocks are ran as far as oiling, they get enough oil to the lifters that go around the oil and squeeze out onto the roller bearing and onto the cam, keeping it well lubricated over 1,000 RPM. As well as idling. If these engines had a problem with lubrication to the lifters as something as severe as splash lubrication, if they relied off splash lubrication, this problem would be a lot worse, and Chrysler would eventually have to do a recall and completely redesign their engine to completely fix this issue. But since it is not, and if you want to quote me on this, go ahead, it is not that comic of a problem. I have talked to one of my local technicians who works on one of these engines. He works at a Chrysler dealership. He works on these engines every day. He gets new ones in every day that he has different problems with, and he rarely ever sees one come in with a lifter failure. And he is telling me the stone cold truth, because I have seen it as well. I have looked at other mechanic shops, and they say 5.7 Hemis, 2009 and up, they rarely come in for lifter failures. Notice I said 2009 and up, because the 5.7 Hemis that they usually get in are from valve seat damage. But that's a completely different problem. Anyway, so the lifter failure is not as bad on these engines as what it's made up to be. The only reason why it is broadcasted and talked about so much is the repair bill on how to fix it. Either you just replace the engine, or you tear it down to a short block, what it is right now, where I've got the cylinder heads off, front timing cover off, and the camshaft out. Because you have to get the heads off in order to remove the lifters. That's why this engine is broadcasted so bad about lifter failure. Now let me ask you something. Why? Actually, no, the 5.3s and 6.0s and LS engines are broadcasted about it quite a bit, because they have to have the same procedure done. Heads removed, front timing cover out, camshaft out, in order to replace a damaged cam and lifter. Two failures on engines. Exact same failures on different engines. Think about that. Exact same failure. Lifter and cam problems. Lifter and cam problems. There was a guy who had 2007 Silverado who had lifter cam problems. It was a 2500 with a 6.0 that ate a cam lobe. Same thing with these. So what causes the lifter failure? Because obviously you can see in here, the camshaft gets plenty of splash lubrication. Why do the lifters fail on these engines too? One may theorize it comes down to quality of parts. Yes, that can be a playing factor. Not saying that's not ruled out. That can happen. You can get a faulty lifter that can break. But however, the big problem about these engines is that they have multiple lifters fail. Now, why is that? It comes down to maintenance and whether or not you're tone deaf. What is tone deaf? So you hear a problem with your vehicle and you ignore it. You just let it go on and on and on, and you just figure it's just a new quirk of the engine, when it's not. Because when these lifters start tapping, it's weird how these engines work. But eventually you'll start hearing a tap, and you may think it's an exhaust leak, because that's one thing that these engines are known for. So my idea on why it has so many ones that fail is it just gets ignored. Because LS engines, they're not as known for their exhaust leaks, so you'll hear a lifter tap pretty fast, and you'll get in there and get it done, and it's usually only just one. These ones have multiple, and that's because of how the lifters fail. They stop rolling, eat up the needle bearings, and they start rolling again, so the engine still runs okay, may have a little bit of a tap, and then it will just start eating away the cam, and others down the line will start failing, especially if the engine's not maintained well. Now, maintenance does play a factor in any engine. The LS, 5.7 Hemi, even that 440 right there. So, if you don't maintain your engine well, it's going to break. There's no way around that. It's going to break. So, with these engines, how the lifters also may fail is due to high idle time. That was one thing Reignited also said in one of his videos. He's someone who works on these engines. He's a Chrysler mechanic, and he's dealt with these engines for over a decade. And he's noted that the only engines that he sees that comes in with lifter problems are cop cars and fleet trucks. Now, what do those two vehicles have in common? One, they can either have bad maintenance routines, which can cause that, or two, high idle times. Basically, the engine just sitting there, spinning down below 1,000 RPM for hours and hours and hours on end. Okay, so let me get something out here real fast. These engines were designed for one big thing in mind: convenience. The convenience of turning that key, firing it up, putting it in drive, and going. That is the convenience these engines are designed for. They are designed to fire up and go, and get you to wherever you need to go, and back. They are designed for that convenience. So, with that in mind, they are designed to get up and run. So they do not like long idle times. That is what also causes lifter failure. So, to bring up another argument that UTG more than likely probably bring up again, if he sees this video, is the angle of the lifters. So I want to talk about that real fast. So, with it being a Hemi engine, and the reason why the camshaft is so far away from the crank is, for one, better valve train geometry. If you ever worked on a Hemi, you know the older ones had terrible valve train geometry. They were not really good about that. They did have a good head, but the valve train geometry was not that great. So what Chrysler came up with is to move the camshaft farther up in the block, which causes what he says is the error problem with the Hemi. So most lifters sit maybe like right about that in the block. The 5.7 Hemi lifter sits like this. So he claims that the oil does not have a good enough slant to run down the lifter to get to the needle bearings and to lubricate the roller. And he supposedly proves this by pulling the lifter out, getting it to the angle of the Hemi requires, and pours oil on it, and it just pours oil off like this. It just goes straight down, doesn't even get to the roller. So that's what he claims causes the lifter failure also. But as you'll see, if you go watch his video, and I do say this, go watch his video, and you'll see how he pours the oil on the lifter. If you notice, he does it outside of the block, and he's missing one key bit of information. And that is your lifter bore. My fist is representing the lifter bore. It completely conceals almost the entire lifter except for the bottom, where obviously it rolls on the cam, and almost all the top because it rides in one of these, like so. So that is not the case. He's missing the lifter bore And if you think about it, if you've got that lifter bore and you have 25 pounds of oil pressure, that oil pressure is going down this way and squeezing out. And if you look, it's not a completely encased roller, so you'll have oil flow going right onto the lifter. So the lifter does get plenty of oil. It just boils down to how well the vehicle is maintained, when you change your oils, and how long you idle it. So my suggestion is don't go out on a cold morning, fire it up, let it warm up for an hour. Don't do that. Go out there, fire it up, leave it alone for 10 or 20 minutes. That's more than enough time for the engine to warm up, get your heater going, and you're good. So, I hope that really helps people understand there is no design flaws with the 5.7 Hemi block. It just comes down quality of parts, how well the engine's maintained, and idle time. And with that, I hope y'all now have a better understanding of why the lifters fail on these engines and how common it is. Once again, it's not a common failure. So quit thinking that this is a common failure and it's going to happen to your Hemi. If you maintain it, change your oils, change the oil, and don't let it idle for over an hour, you'll be fine. Now, yes, you're still going to have that rare few that do fail, no matter how well you take care of it. That's the nature of the beast, guys. There's nothing else I can say on that. That's the nature of the beast of an engine. It happens to all of them. You can have an overhead cam engine that has the best lubrication to the camshaft, and the camshaft still will fail. That is the nature of the beast. Not every part's perfect. Anything man-made, there's a saying I go by, anything man-made will either last 10 years or 10 seconds. So, I hope that really helps y'all figure out the mystery and the myth behind the Hemi lifter tick. And with that, I bid y'all good night, and I will catch y'all on the next one.